Dream Addict. The mall was bustling with life, its glass doors reflecting the soft glow of the midday sun. Marquise parted ways with his wife, Nellie, and son, Vince, before heading toward the electronics store. It was supposed to be a quick stop, nothing out of the ordinary. They were just going to the shoe store across the parking lot, and Marquise wanted to pick up a phone charger before joining them. He turned back for one last look, catching a glimpse of Nellie holding Vince's tiny hand, the boy's laughter echoing among the cars. Just as he opened the door and began entering, he heard something strange, stopping him in his tracks. It was a single pop, sharp and deafening as it pierced through the air, followed by a cacophony of screams. Soon after, rapid gunfire followed that first shot, like water following a current. His heart seized in his chest before spinning around to see people running out of the mall. Snapping out of it, he instead ran toward it, aiming for the shoe store, scanning the numerous new faces with each step. "Nellie! Vince!" he shouted, his voice swallowed by the chaos. The closer he got, the louder the gunshots. Bodies surged past him, people fleeing in every direction. The world blurred as he shoved through the panic, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Somewhere in the distance, he heard a child cry out. "Vince?" His legs carried him forward even faster, his chest tightening with each step. He was so close. Then, the searing pain, sharp, burning, it tore through his side, dropping him to the ground, blood pooling beneath him. His vision blurred, the sky above spinning, making him dizzy. Marquise reached out toward the glass doors, his fingers trembling, slowing with each movement. "Nellie! Vince!" he tried to call out, before everything faded to black. The office was comfortable, lit up by the bright sun shining in the window. Marquise sat on the worn leather couch, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. The soft hum of a clock filled the silence, marking each second while across from him, behind a dark oak desk, sat Dr. Savion Brownlee, a notepad resting casually in his lap. Marquise shifted, his eyes darting around the room, bookcases filled with psychology texts, diplomas neatly framed on the wall, and a small indoor plant in the corner, probably fake. Savion finally looked up, his eyes studying the client in need before beginning. "So, how are you feeling today, Marquise?" He was familiar, an old classmate of Katrina's, who had referred her husband to her friend. Marquise cleared his throat, unsure how to start. He glanced down at his hands, avoiding eye contact. "It's, been tough," he admitted. "I still can't sleep, and when I do, the nightmares, they're always the same." "The shooting?" "Yeah," Marquise nodded, his voice faltering. "Lately, it's just I can't stop thinking about it. Every time I close my eyes, I see them, Nell, Vince, and I don't know how to make it stop." Savion leaned forward slightly, scribbling a quick note before meeting Marquise's gaze. "That's completely understandable, given what you've been through. Losing a family in such a traumatic way, it leaves scars. Deep ones." Marquise nodded again before continuing. I need to move on, but I don't know how. And now, with everything else going on, Katrina being pregnant, me losing my job, I feel like I'm drowning. I can't be there for her the way I should be. I've never really been depressed before, but man. Katrina told me about your situation when she referred you. I understand you were recently laid off?" Marquise sighed. Yeah, FedEx downsized. I thought I had something stable, something I could rely on, and I did for years. Now it's gone, and we're struggling with money. I'm trying to find work, but that's a lot to carry, especially on top of what you've already been through. It's no wonder your mind is having trouble resting." He paused for a moment, tapping his pen lightly against the notepad. "Look, I've been working with a new medication that might help. It's designed to target exactly what you're experiencing, recurring nightmares, difficulty sleeping. And you think this could work for me?" "I believe it could be exactly what you need," Savion replied. Why not give it a shot? Although fairly new, no one has reported any adverse side effects. It's helped others in your situation, people with severe trauma, insomnia. After a long moment of thought, he replied, I'll try it, man. I'll try anything at this point. Savion gave a nod before filling out the paperwork for the prescription. Take one before bed. Start with the lowest dose, and if it feels right, we'll adjust as necessary. You should start feeling the effects almost immediately. Thanks, Dr. Brownlee, Marquise said before standing. Hey, call me Savion. And remember, this is just one step. Keep talking to Katrina, and if anything feels off, don't hesitate to reach out. I will. Thanks again, Savion, he ended before leaving the office and picking up the prescription. As he left, the weight of the world still clung to him, but for the first time in a long while, Marquise felt the faintest glimmer of hope. Later that day, the front door creaked as Marquise stepped inside, the cool air of their low square-footage apartment greeting him. The smell of something cooking wafted through the air, and the sound of soft music played from the kitchen. Katrina appeared from around the corner, her belly just beginning to show. She smiled, wiping her hands on a towel before asking, How'd it go? The two kissed before Marquise pulled the bottle from his pocket. He held it up for her to see before replying, Savion prescribed this. It's supposed to help with my sleep. You think it'll work? She asked, studying the bottle. I don't know, he said, tossing the bottle onto the coffee table as he sank into the couch. But I sure hope so. He said it's new, so I'm not even sure I want to try it. Katrina sat beside him and held his hand. Honey, you've got to get some sleep. If it can give you some peace, it's worth a try. Marquise nodded, getting up to grab a beer before Katrina continued. Anything from the job search? She asked. He shook his head, trying to hide his frustration. Nah, still looking though. She squeezed his hand, her thumb tracing slow circles over his skin. We'll figure it out, she ended, resting her head on his shoulder. At least we've got some savings, he assured her, this being the first time he smiled since he entered. About 7 months' worth, but I can see that running out quick, especially with the baby coming. I could go back to work, at least until you find something. I could pick up a part-time job. No, Marquise interrupted. He took a deep inhale and rubbed her hand before looking his wife in the eyes. You shouldn't be working, baby. You're already 3 months pregnant, and I want you to be able to rest. Our little girl needs it. I can handle it. Katrina pulled back before replying, I'm not helpless, Marquise. If you need time to figure things out, I can help. It doesn't have to all be on you. He ran a hand through his hair before grabbing her face and replying, I know, I want to do this for us, for you and the baby. I'll find something. Katrina smiled, her hand resting on her belly. I know you will, but don't shut me out if you need help. We're in this together. He sighed, leaning back against the couch, and took a sip of beer. You know, I've been thinking about going back to digital marketing, he mentioned. I mean, that's what I got my degree in before I took the FedEx job. I didn't do it back then because FedEx was more secure. At least I thought it was. Maybe it's time I go back. Baby, I trust you with whatever you decide. I know you gonna make it work. If I didn't, I wouldn't have married you. Katrina leaned in, kissing him gently on the cheek. Thanks. I'm glad you did, he laughed, his hand brushing over hers. The glow of Marquise's laptop illuminated his face as he sat, fingers tapping against the keyboard. He hated the idea of taking drugs, so before he would try this one, he'd at least do some research. Instantly, pages of articles, blogs, and videos flooded the screen. He clicked on the first testimonial he saw. Mr. Kaur changed my life. The video opened with a woman in her 30s, smiling brightly at the camera. "I was skeptical at first," she began, "but after just one night, I knew I'd found something special. I've struggled with insomnia for years, but now I look forward to the night." She claimed that she regained control over her life through her dreams, shaping them into whatever she desired. "It's like having your own personal universe," she said with a smile. "You can learn, explore, and most importantly, escape." What the hell is she talking about, he wondered. Control your dreams? He clicked onto another page, scrolling through more stories, people recounting how they'd accessed forgotten memories, revisited their past, faced their fears, and even mastered new skills through dream learning. One testimonial stood out. "How it works is," a student began, "I learned I could actually teach myself in a dream from subconscious information." The person explained that, for example, they can get a book they've never read before, and as long as he saw each page, doesn't have to read it, he just has to see it. If he can do that, then he found that he could then access that information in his dream. He also found that the more that he looked at the page when he was awake, the clearer it became in his dream, allowing him to study not only when he was awake, but also asleep, feeling fully rested after. Marquise leaned back in his chair, processing what he'd just read. Dream learning? The concept was mind-boggling. A new window opened, showing a news segment on the drug. "Doctors are calling it a breakthrough," the anchor began. "While some express concerns over potential side effects, the drug has revolutionized how people approach sleep." His gaze flickered back to the bottle. He continued to read and watch testimonials that would pop up, repeating that the drug gave them the ability to create and control entire dream worlds. Was it real? It felt like a hoax. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of his wife's footsteps as she entered the room. "You're still researching that pill?" she asked. Yeah, baby. There's a lot of info out there. People are saying it can help." Katrina kissed the top of his head, her fingers brushing through his hair. "Okay, honey, let me know how it goes. If you go crazy, I'm killing Savian," she joked before kissing him goodnight. A few minutes after, Marquise stood in the bathroom, his reflection staring back at him. He glanced back toward the bedroom where the already sleeping Katrina lay curled up under the blankets. "Here goes nothing," he muttered, and with a deep breath closed his eyes and swallowed the pill before chasing it down with a glass of water. He wiped his mouth and flicked off the bathroom light, heading back to bed. The room was dark except for the moonlight filtering through the blinds, and it was silent, minus the soft snore of his wife. He slipped under the covers, pulling them up to his chin as he stared at the ceiling, waiting. This shit isn't going to work, he thought. The pill's effects were supposed to be immediate, but he didn't feel a thing. Minutes passed. His mind began to wander, drifting through half-formed thoughts and fleeting memories. But before Marquise knew it, his eyelids grew heavy, and he drifted into darkness. When Marquise opened them, he expected it to be morning, until he soon realized he was no longer in bed. It was a gray day in the mall parking lot as he, Nellie, and Vince pulled in toward the mall. Not again, he thought. As soon as he had that thought of dreading seeing the same horrific moment again, he was thrown somewhere completely different. The world around him was bright. The sky above was a deep, endless blue stretching out in every direction. Below him, a lush field of green grass rippled in the breeze, extending as far as the eye could see. A gentle warmth bathed his skin. He looked down at himself and saw what was also below him. He stood on a large boulder atop a mountain the size of Everest. He gasped, clinching the rock behind him, leaning back as he struggled to hold on. The wind pressed against his face, and Marquise started to breathe even more rapidly. "Where am I, and how did I get here?" he wondered. A few seconds later he realized he was in a dream. But was he really? Seemed like the only logical explanation. There's only one way to find out. Taking a deep breath, he jumped, and the boulder above faded as he fell. It felt like Marquise was falling for years, until just when he was set to be thrown to the ground. His toes hovered inches above the grass, his body suspended in mid-air. Now his heart beat faster than ever, but his question had been answered, and he began to smile. He thought back to the testimonials he'd read. People had said you could do anything in your dreams, anything at all. Slowly he lifted higher as the ground fell away beneath him while he rose into the air, soaring above the field, the wind whipping through his hair. He laughed, an actual real laugh, something he hadn't done in years. He pushed himself higher and higher, the world shrinking below him. He felt invincible, free. For the first time since the shooting, there were no screams, no blood, no nightmare pulling him under. This was the first good dream he could remember. Marquise stretched his arms wide, embracing the endless sky as he flew faster, the wind rushing past him. He flew over mountains, across rivers, and even dove into the ocean, feeling the cool water rush over him before bursting back through the surface. He marveled at the ease of it all, how effortless everything felt in this place. There were no limits, no fears, no grief. This was his world. The first rays of morning light peeked through the blinds as Marquise's eyes fluttered open. For a moment, he lay there, disoriented, his mind still lingering in the dream. He blinked, taking in the familiar surroundings of his bedroom. The soft gray walls, the clock ticking on the nightstand, Katrina's gentle breathing beside him. But something was different. The heaviness that usually greeted him every morning was gone, replaced by a lightness he hadn't felt in years. As he sat up in bed, the memory of soaring through the sky, of diving into the ocean, came rushing back. A small smile tugged at his lips as he realized that the pill had worked. Really worked. Even better than he thought. For the first time in a long while, Marquise felt like his life was about to change. By the time he got out of the shower, Katrina was already up. The smell of brewed coffee filled the air, blending with the sound of eggs sizzling in the pan. "Good morning, baby," Marquise said as he kissed his wife. "Well, someone's in a good mood today," she looked back and remarked. "Very," he concluded, sitting down at the kitchen table, his mind still on his experience. The clinking of silverware snapped him out of his reverie. Katrina set a plate of scrambled eggs and toast in front of him, then poured herself a cup of coffee before sitting down across the table. "Yeah? Tell me about it." Marquise leaned forward. "This is the first time I can remember having a good dream and feeling like I actually got some sleep." "What was the dream about?" "I could control everything," he perked up and said. "I was flying, Katrina, like really flying. It felt so real, like I was in complete control. I even dove in the ocean. I've never felt anything like it." Katrina sipped her coffee, her lips curving into a smile. "That sounds incredible. So, no more bad dreams?" Marquise shook his head. "I hope not. No, I don't think so. At least, not last night." "Thank God, honey. I'm so happy it helped. So, what's the plan for today?" "Well," he said, leaning back in his chair and grabbing his phone from the table, "gotta check my emails, see if I got any job replies back. Must have sent my resume to 30 different places, at least locally." "Fingers crossed," she smiled. Marquise opened his emails to pull up his inbox. He focused on the screen as he scrolled through them. Nothing but ads and promotions at first. He continued scrolling until seeing a response from an application he submitted 3 weeks before. It was from UPS. After opening, he stared at the words for a long time, his eyes tracing over the same corporate message he'd seen too many times before. "We regret to inform you." The rejection was as impersonal as always, but it stung just the same. Jesus, did they even read it? He thought. "Damn it," he muttered, running a hand over his face. A moment later, his phone buzzed. Another email, this time from Amazon. He already knew what it was, not even wanting to read it. Still, he opened it anyway as his heart sank, in the hopes of something, anything positive. Nope, just as he thought. 2 rejections in one morning. His face couldn't hide his mood. "More bad news?" Katrina asked, setting the cup down on the table. Marquise let out a bitter laugh and shook his head. "Yeah, UPS and Amazon both. Same old shit." Katrina sighed, got up and walked over to him, wrapping her arms around his shoulders. "I'm sorry, babe. It'll get better. At least you got a good night's sleep," she joked. He grinned, leaning back into her embrace, and held her arms tight to him. "I mean, I just don't understand it. I've got the experience, been a driver for years, starting to get suspicious. Honey, it is not you. It's just the job market right now. They're downsizing everywhere, cutting costs. It's all on the news." "I know, but we can't keep using what we saved up all this time. Amani coming in a few months, and I don't want you to have to worry about a damn thing." Katrina moved around to face him, cupping his face in her hands. "I know I ain't got nothing to worry about, 'cause I know you'll find something. Even if it takes a little time, we'll figure it out together if we need to. You know you don't have to carry this all on your own." Marquise nodded, appreciative of his wife. After Marquise went back to the guest room that they had converted into a home office, he sat in front of the desktop and began scrolling through a long list of digital marketing tutorials and articles. He had made his decision. He was out of work, and he majored in something he hasn't yet made any money from, so why not go back to his first love? The frustration gnawed at him. There were so many new things to learn, and he needed to learn fast. Hours later, after spending most of the day flipping through guides, watching videos, and taking notes, it felt like he hadn't gotten anywhere significant. The learning curve may be too steep. He hesitated for a moment, his fingers tapping on the keyboard. Was this really a good idea, he wondered, glancing at the bottle of Mystacor. The screen made his eyes weary, and he blinked, looking toward the open window light. With a sigh, he got up, closing the blinds, and left the room. Within seconds, he was back from the bedroom before shutting the office door. Marquise then sat back down, unscrewed the bottle of Mystacor, letting one small pill fall into his hand. "Let's figure out if this actually works," he thought, before swallowing it down with a glass of water. As he began to feel sleepy, he reclined his chair all the way back and closed his eyes. His mind started to drift, his body sinking into the seat. When Marquise opened his eyes, he was standing in front of a grand mansion. It had been the one he always wanted, one in which he created with his mind. Its towering glass walls and large towers reflected under the sunlight, and a golden gate stood at the entrance. Marquise smiled to himself, admiring the work he had done before pushing the gate open and walking along the stone pathway, feeling the cool breeze brush against his skin. The front doors swung open as he approached, welcoming him inside. The interior was just as impressive, vast rooms that he could never own in reality, but here there were multiple rooms on multiple floors, accompanied by an elevator. After exploring, he walked over to the study, approaching one of the large bookshelves, pulled one down and opened it, flipping through the pages. Just what he was looking for. The book he had given a quick look over earlier. Digital Marketing Strategy by Simon something. Apparently, he hadn't paid enough attention when he was awake for it to be clear enough. Unimportant, he thought, as he opened the text. Marquise smiled, sitting down at one of his new, large, comfortable chairs, and began studying. When he awoke, he was amazed to see that the words in the book really did match what he had read in the dream. Over time, he continued this process, reading through various texts on digital marketing, search engine optimization, social media strategies, content creation, email campaigns. Every word, every concept became crystal clear in his mind. He felt the information settle in his subconscious, as if it had always been there, waiting for him to unlock it. He moved from book to book, taking in as much information as possible. He was learning at least 3 times faster than if he hadn't had access to the drug. Weeks later, Marquise awoke one morning, feeling a sense of exhilaration. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a soft orange glow through the blinds. His body felt rested, but more importantly, his mind was sharp. Sharper than it had been in months, actually, sharper than it had ever been. He grabbed his phone from the nightstand and quickly pulled up his notes app. He began typing out everything he had learned in his dream, strategies, concepts, ideas. The knowledge was fresh, vivid, like he had spent the entire night studying without any of the exhaustion that usually followed a late-night cram session. Katrina stirred beside him as she managed to mumble, "You're up early." Her husband smiled, rubbing a hand against her head, saying, "Yep, early bird gets the worm, baby." That afternoon, just as Marquise was about to close his laptop and take a break, his eyes scanned over the subject line. For a moment, he thought it was just another rejection. But then he saw, "Congratulations, Marquise. Welcome to the team." His heart skipped a beat as he opened the email and read, "Baby!" he yelled. "Katrina, come look at this!" He heard the sound of footsteps scurrying toward him before she appeared from the hallway. "What's wrong?" she asked, rushing over. "Look, I got it. That job I told you about, I got it. I start next week." "What? Baby, you're serious?" Her eyes lit up as she scanned the email. "Hell yeah, finally. What's even better is it's remote, so I can be here if you need anything." "Yeah, baby!" she exclaimed, wrapping her arm around him. "We gotta celebrate." Later that evening, Marquise drank his wine while Katrina had orange juice. They listened to music and danced, and Marquise felt lighter than he had in a long time. The first week of his new job flew by, and he loved it. Working from home was a blessing. No commute, no dealing with office politics. He could set his own schedule, take breaks when he wanted, and, most importantly, spend time in the dream world whenever he had a chance. One evening, Marquise came out of his office after a long day, his eyes still adjusting to the dim light of the living room. Katrina sat on the couch, her feet propped up, a smile appearing on her face as she rested her hand on her growing belly. "Hey, honey," she greeted him warmly. "How was work?" "Good," he replied, though his mind was somewhere else, still halfway in the dream world, where he had spent his last break flying through a town he had designed himself in the 16th century. Katrina patted the spot next to her on the couch. "Come sit with me. I miss you." Marquise hesitated because there was a part of him that wanted to go back to the dream world. Still, he forced himself to walk over and sit beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "I miss you too," he said, and though it was the truth, he really did miss this other world that felt so real. Katrina leaned into him and sighed. "I'm really glad you got this job, baby. It feels like things are finally starting to come together." "Yeah, well, you and Imani deserve it." Another week had passed, and Marquise had been doing even better at his job, so much that the manager had promoted him. But not without cost. The time he either spent working or thinking about work left little time for himself. This left the only thing he looked forward to, being the dream world. One day, the soft glow of Marquise's computer screen was the only light in the office as he sat back in his chair, staring at the endless stream of work emails. His eyes hurt as his hands hovered over the keyboard. He glanced at the clock on the corner of the screen. It was only the afternoon, but the hours had already begun to blur together, one task bleeding into the next. His gaze drifted toward the bottle of Mystacor pills sitting next to his Red Bull. He had done enough work for the day. He could afford a break. With a sigh, Marquise reached for the bottle and popped one of the pills into his mouth, washing it down with the last sip of his energy drink. He leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, he was standing on a vast beach, the pearl-white sand stretching in both directions. The ocean's waves lapped at the shore, while the sun hung low in the sky, casting an orange glow over the water. A breeze swept through his hair, carrying with it the fresh, salty scent of the sea. Despite the breeze, the weather was perfect, generating a warmth covering his body. Marquise smiled to himself, taking in the beauty before a low rumble shook the ground beneath him, and he turned toward the ocean to see a massive creature rising from the depths. A whale, its sleek body glistening under the sunlight as it breached the surface, seemed to summon him. Marquise walked toward the giant, before stopping at the water. Taking a breath, he took a step, and then more, walking not through, but on the water. As he did this, the whale began swimming toward him before stopping at his toes. Marquise climbed onto its back, gripping the smooth, wet skin, and the creature let out a deep sound that seemed to cause the ocean itself to shudder. With a powerful surge, it began to move, gliding through the water, taking Marquise with it. The world blurred around him as they moved faster, soaring through the ocean at incredible speeds. Marquise laughed, feeling weightless. An hour later, Marquise awoke to a knock at the door, the thrill of the ride still fresh in his mind. "Marquise," Katrina called from outside. "You didn't hear me knocking?" she asked before letting herself in. "You've been in here all day. I ordered DoorDash. It's on the table. Do you want it now, or are you still working?" Why not, he thought. After all, he was hungry. "Yeah, just been busy with work, baby. I'll be out in a minute," he concluded, rubbing his eyes. "Okay," she ended, giving him a strange look before closing the door. He nodded and watched as she left the room, and despite still being a little drowsy, he eventually stood. The kitchen was quiet as he entered and sat in front of the Italian Katrina had ordered. She knew he was basic, preferring the spaghetti over her favorite, what he deemed the sophisticated fettuccine alfredo. He dove into the meal like a starving wolf, barely paying any attention to her. "Marquise, we need to talk," his wife interrupted, in a tone he wasn't used to hearing. He glanced up from his plate, his eyebrows furrowing, and asked, "What's wrong, baby?" She hadn't touched her food yet. "About us," Katrina replied. "About how you've been acting lately." He took a deep breath and leaned back in his chair. "What do you mean?" he asked, tossing his fork on top of his food. "Okay, what I mean is I've been feeling distant from you. Honey, I'm glad you've got a job. I really am, and I appreciate it so much, but you've been spending so much time working that it's like you don't even notice me anymore." Marquise wondered if her pregnancy might be causing her to get emotional. wondered, but dared not say it. I'm just working, Katrina. You know that." "Are you?" she asked, leaning in. "Because it doesn't feel like you're just working. Half the time you're in there sleeping. I just don't understand how somebody can sleep so much during the day and night." "Baby, you know the Mysticore helps me with work, to learn quicker. How do you think I got the job in the first place?" "I understand that, and congratulations on getting promoted, but you need to still make spending time together a priority. You're missing doctor's appointments. You forget things we've talked about. It's like you're not even here anymore." "Baby, I understand. I'm just trying to build something for us. Do you think it's easy, working this job and making sure we're financially stable? I'm using the dream world to get better, to make sure I'm successful. I ain't doing this shit for me. I'm doing this for you and the baby." "But what's the point of all that if you're not even here with us?" "I don't care about the money, Marquise. I care about you." He shook his head and said, "And baby, I'm gonna be all right. We will be good. I know what I'm doing." "Do you? And don't tell me that you're just using it for work, 'cause I've heard you laughing in your dreams." "Didn't know digital marketing was that funny." Marquise stood up, pushing his chair back with more force than he intended. "Baby, do I have fun at times? Yeah, I might take a quick break to fly or something, but that's rare," he lied. "Look, baby, I'll eat this later. Gotta get back to work," he ended before kissing her and turning to walk away. "Exactly what I mean," she muttered to herself as she watched her husband leave. When Marquise got back to the office, he thought about what they had discussed. Feeling remorse, he spent the day actually working. Despite this, Katrina still gave him the semi-silent treatment the remainder of that day. As he slept on the couch where he was forced, he took another Mysticore solely to help him sleep, of course. The mansion he had created was exactly as Marquise had left it, grand and luxurious. He sat in a plush chair in one of the many opulent rooms, the soft sound of water trickling from a large mermaid fountain filling the air. A beautiful, scantily clad massage therapist stood behind him, kneading the tension from his shoulders as he tried to read. The words were harder to focus on now. Makes sense since he barely looked at the book earlier that day. Forget it, Marquise thought, closing his eyes and leaning back. "Everything's so much easier here," he told the woman as her hands worked at his neck. "I don't know why I even bother sometimes. Katrina doesn't understand. She doesn't get how hard it is. But here I don't have to worry about anything." "She's so lucky to have you," the woman replied. He smiled, turning his head toward the massive windows that lined one side of the room. The sunlight poured in, golden and warm, casting long shadows across the floor. Beyond the window, the sky was a brilliant blue dotted with white clouds. It was the perfect day for a flight, he thought. Marquise arose, reached the window, and placed his hands on the smooth frame, preparing to once again jump into the air and take off into the endless sky. Just as he was about to leap, a voice called out behind him. "Marquise!" He stopped in his tracks to the familiar voice and shuddered. Marquise froze, his heart skipping a beat before snapping his head around. He couldn't believe it. A woman stood in the doorway. How could this be? It was Nellie. His breath caught in his throat. There she was, just as he remembered her. Her dark hair fell in loose waves around her shoulders. She smiled, then his eyes traced to the small figure beside her. Vince, their 5-year-old son, looked the same as the last time his father had seen him, alive. Marquise's heart pounded in his chest, and he almost collapsed before calling out, "Nellie? Vince?" Nellie's smile grew wider, matching his, and her eyes shined. "Marky?" she asked, taking a step forward. He hadn't been called that in so long, and didn't realize how much he had yearned to hear it from that voice. He rushed toward them, his legs carrying him faster than he thought possible, and fell to his knees in front of Vince, pulling the boy into his arms. "Vince, my son! Oh, my son! My beautiful son!" he continued, his voice cracking. "I missed you so much." Vince wrapped his small arms around his father's neck. "I missed you too, Daddy," he said, clutching him tight. Tears welled up in Marquise's eyes as he held Vince. He had dreamed of this moment for years, hoping to meet them again in the afterlife if there was one, but here they were, before him. Marquise picked the boy up and embraced his wife, who said, "Marquis, we've missed you. It's been too long." He looked up at her, his vision blurred with tears. How are you here? I can't believe this." "It doesn't matter," she smiled. "We're here now, together finally." "I can't believe this," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I thought I'd lost you both, forever." "We're here," she repeated. "We never left. We were always with you." Marquise was speechless as he began to cry, more than he ever had, and the three of them spent the rest of the time together. They played in the mansion's gardens, Vince running through the flowers, while Marquise and Nellie watched from a distance, laughing and reminiscing, their favorite moments together, how they met, their plans that had been cut short. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the garden, the three sat on a bench padded with roses, Vince resting his head on his father's lap, fast asleep. "I wish this could last forever," Marquise murmured, his hand stroking his son's hair. "Maybe it can," Nellie smiled. "You don't have to leave, my love. You can stay with us." He looked at her and smiled before his eyes drifted away in thought. After he awoke, he realized it was still night and that he was crying. After getting up to use the restroom, he returned to the couch, unable to rid his mind of Nellie and Vince. Not that he wanted to. They had had such a great time together, better than any he could remember. Without hesitation, Marquise laid back on the sofa and popped another Mysticor, and within seconds, he, Nellie, and Vince were back together. Now that he had access to them, he became obsessed, spending every moment not at work, with them as the weeks passed. All the while, Marquise struggled to notice that the relationship with his living wife, Katrina, continued to deteriorate. It was Thursday, and the harsh buzz of Marquise's phone jolted him from his work. He had gotten behind in his job due to the time he was spending with Nellie and their son, having already been reprimanded. Today he had to come into one of the company's on-site locations because his own personal computer had broken. Marquise tried to focus, but it buzzed again. Frowning, he picked it up, his heart sinking as he saw the series of missed texts from Katrina. "Hey, where are you? We have the appointment at 3 o'clock, was the first message. "Marquise, you said you'd be here," was the next. And lastly, "Okay, I'm leaving. I'll have to take an Uber or something." He stared at the messages, his chest tightening. He had completely forgotten about her doctor's appointment. How could he have let this happen? His heart raced as he tried to think of what to say, but no excuse seemed good enough. Before he could type a response, the phone buzzed again, another message from Katrina. "Just left the doctor." "Imani looks to be growing normally," he read. His stomach churned. He called, but there was no answer. Marquise typed back a response right after, his fingers trembling. "I'm so sorry. I got caught up with work. I'll make it up to you, I promise," he wrote. The message felt hollow even as he sent it. Marquise rushed home to find his wife sitting on the patio. Katrina sighed, folding her arms across her chest. "I don't understand, Marquise. It's like I'm living with a stranger. Ever since we had that talk about priorities, it's like you don't even care anymore." I know, honey, he began, taking a step toward her. I'm so sorry. I just got caught up at work. You know I wanted to be there. Honey, I get that. I really do, but work is work. Family over work. Family always comes first. At least you seem happier when I do see you. Baby, that's because you make me happy. Look, I'm sorry, and it won't happen again. I'll tell you what does need to start happening again, she began, looking Marquise in the eyes. He gave a confused look until she said, We haven't had sex in over a month. I'm starting to get self-conscious. I would ask if you're cheating, but I know you spend most of the time here. Marquise moved closer to Katrina, sitting down next to her, and held her hand. That's the last way you need to feel, baby. It's just that work's been draining. You know you're the most beautiful woman on earth to me. She smiled, looking away before looking back at him and saying, Prove it. Any further confusion he had was alleviated by what she did next. Katrina stood up and went back in the house before stopping at the bedroom door and gesturing to him to come in. Marquise did as he was instructed, following his wife inside the room and shut the door behind them. When the couple did what they did on that bed, Marquise felt guilty because the only thing he could think about was Nellie. Katrina, too, noticed something was off during the, let's say, session, but attributed to the positional awkwardness caused by her pregnancy. A week later, and with a new computer, Marquise was back in his home office. Although Katrina had been satisfied with prior encounter, their relationship continued to sour after. Although he knew it wasn't, he felt like he was cheating on Nellie by having sex with Katrina and did his best to avoid it. He looked forward to every break he would get, before, during, and after work, to see Nellie and Vince. Marquise found himself back in his mansion, every detail more precise than before. The soft velvet curtains swaying in the breeze, the gentle hum of distant lo-fi echoing through the halls. Nellie stood by the entrance smiling as her husband appeared. He ran up and embraced her, lifting Nellie off her feet. Where's Vince? He asked. He's on the playground, she replied. I missed you, Marquis. They stood there before she grabbed him by the shirt, pulling him closer and looking into his eyes. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling Nellie into a deeper embrace, letting her lips brush against his neck. Their lips met and the world spun around them. Before he knew it, it was night and they were in a bed in the sky next to the Eiffel Tower overlooking Paris. They kissed like a couple who hasn't in years because they hadn't. The kiss led to more things he didn't want to fight. This isn't real, he assured himself. She helped him remove his shirt and they undressed. It's okay, she reassured him, holding his cheek. He didn't know a dream could feel this real. The touch, the pleasure. They moaned as she rode him, riding back and forth, up and down, slowly grinding on every inch. He was close, grabbing her breasts and rubbing her nipples, and now just about to. Marquise! His eyes flew open, snapped out of the dream, and shot up in the chair. Katrina stood in front of him, her arms crossed, her face a mixture of confusion and pain. Marquise! Who were you talking to? She demanded, her voice tight with emotion. He was speechless, his eyes darting around the room as if to find an answer, his mouth open as if to give one he didn't have. I heard you! You were saying someone's name, moaning! I don't know, he finally stammered. Katrina's eyes narrowed, her lips trembling as she took a step closer. Don't lie to me, Marquise. I know something's been going on. You've been distant for weeks, and now this? You're fucking somebody in your sleep? I'm not. Who is it? She demanded, her voice rising. What's going on? So I'm pregnant and now you want to cheat because you're not attracted to me anymore. Baby, what? Baby? Were you calling her baby? Who was it? Tell me. I heard you. Marquise took a deep breath and looked down. "It's Nellie," he whispered, looking back up at her. Katrina froze, her eyes widening. "What did you just say?" Marquise's hand began to shake. "I've been dreaming about her," he admitted. "And Vince. It's like they're still here, and I thought I'd never see them again." Katrina stared at him, her face turning red as she tried to process. "You've been... What? What are you talking about? You've been seeing her? That's not even possible." "But it is. I can fly and do all sorts of things in the dreams. I didn't know it was true, but Mysticore actually lets you control your dreams. It's not like I planned for it to happen. They just showed up." "They? Who is they?" "Vince, my son, Vince. I see him too. Marquise, you've got a family here that needs you, a whole-ass wife here that needs Dick. Baby, I know, and that's why I work so much. It's just, I didn't mean for it to happen." "Hold up, so you were fucking your dead wife in your dreams while we barely even have sex? The fuck? No, I'm not. That was the first, only time." Katrina shook her head. "Oh, you think a bitch stupid. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I didn't—" "Stop!" she interrupted, her voice breaking. "Just stop. I can't do this." She turned away, tears streaming down her face as she moved toward the door. Marquise took a step forward, reaching out to her. "Katrina, wait, please. Let me explain." But she didn't turn back, extending her arm behind her to ward him off. Not saying another word, she walked out of the bedroom, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. And as the door closed behind her, Marquise stood there in his office, alone. "She just needs some time and space," he thought. "I'd be upset too." An hour later, as he sat in his office feeling guilty, she opened the door. Though it could be no one else, he was surprised to see her standing there. On her shoulders were 2 large bags, and in her hands were car keys and a phone. He stared at her, unsure of what to say. "I'm going to my mom's," she said as he stood. "Need some space." "Bae, I think you need to let me know when you're over your ex," she interrupted. "This isn't healthy for either of us." Before he was able to reply, she had turned away and left him, alone in their home. After she left, the house seemed to him quieter than it had ever been, and more alone than he had ever been. Marquise sat on the couch, staring at the door Katrina had walked through hours ago. The sound of her footsteps echoed in his mind. She was gone, and he felt terrible. He had messed up. How could he have let this happen? Why didn't he lock the door? But how would he know it would happen? Surely it couldn't be his fault. What was she so mad about anyway? It's not like he actually cheated. I mean, yeah, it felt good. But it's not like I'm going to prostitutes bringing home diseases. No, she has a right to be mad. I know I'd be upset if... I don't even want to think about it. Instead of comforting him, his thoughts served only to agitate Marquise. It was too early to sleep. He wasn't sleepy. He tried watching TV. Nothing good on, everything boring, or at least greatly paled in comparison to the time he spent with... Oh, it's not a big deal, he thought, grabbing the Mysticore. It was the only thing that brought him joy. He popped the pill into his mouth and swallowed it down with a sip of the rum he had been drinking, and when he opened his eyes, he wasn't alone anymore. He was in the garden behind his mansion, as both Nellie and Vince walked beside him. They stopped, and Nellie stood by the rose bushes, sunlight glowing through her hair. She turned to him as a soft smile spread across her face. Vince, seeing a butterfly, began to chase it. "You know," Marquise began, a smirk forming on his face, "that when I drink in the real world, I can still the effects in this one." The two laughed. "Marquis," she said as he stepped to stand beside her, "you're back." "I'm back," he whispered, looking back to his son. She reached out, taking a hold of his hand as the other played with a rose petal. Vince ran up holding the multicolored butterfly in his hand and the other arm outstretched. His small arms wrapped around Marquise's legs, and the boy called out, "Daddy, you're here!" Marquise knelt down, pulling Vince into his arms as the boy giggled. His tiny hands gripped onto his father's shirt. Marquise picked him up and hugged his son, not wanting to let go. They watched the butterfly take off into the sky, and Nellie hugged them both from behind. The family then teleported to the beach in Bali, where Marquise built sandcastles with Vince. The two of them laughed and ran as the waves gently touched their feet. Nellie sat on their 30-foot lavish beach blanket, smiling as she watched on. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the sand, they walked back to the mansion together, only a block away. Vince held both of their hands as his parents spoke, and soon they were back inside. They sat down for dinner at the long, ornate table. The smell of roasted chicken and lobster filled the air as the butlers and maids served them. This was another thing about this world that he loved. You could eat whatever you want and as much as you want and never get fat. "You're so handsome," Nellie remarked, her eyes locking with his across the table. "Every time you leave, it breaks my heart. I love you." A chill ran through his body. He didn't want to leave. He glanced down at Vince, who was happily eating his meal. "There's something I have to tell you," he began, putting his fork down. "What is it, honey?" "Do you mean Katrina? And the little one inside her?" Marquise's eyes widened. "What? You know about her?" Nellie reached across the table, taking his hand in hers. "I know about everything, baby. I couldn't expect you not to move on at some point, could I? I just appreciate the time we have here." Marquise's throat tightened, and he looked away, unable to meet her gaze. A tear fell from his eye. That's another thing. He didn't know he could cry in the dream world. The next few days passed in a blur. Marquise took his sick days for the rest of the week, taking time off to forget about reality. He barely left the bedroom, barely ate, barely spoke to anyone. Katrina wasn't returning his calls. In his dreams, he and Nellie continued to live their life together, as if the shooting had never happened, minus school and work, of course. They ate lunch, dinner, and breakfast together, waffles and pancakes. They went on picnics in Central Park and laughed together in the mansion's garden. Every moment felt real. Every touch, every laugh. He pretended they were because that's the way he wanted it. On the 6th day of his dream binge, Marquise jolted awake. It wasn't an alarm, it was his phone. He had received a text. He sat up before struggling to open his eyes and reached for the phone on the nightstand. His hand trembled as he unlocked the screen when he saw the flood of missed calls and messages from Katrina. The first text was from 2.5 hours earlier. "Marquise," it began, "I started bleeding. I'm scared. I'm on my way to the hospital with my mom." The next text seemed a bit more urgent as she asked, "Where are you? I need you. Please, call me back." 10 minutes later she sent, "I'm at the hospital now. They're doing tests." "Hello? Where are you?" The most recent message was from 45 minutes ago. He read, "I can't believe you're not here. Don't bother calling." Panic seized him, his stomach twisting into knots, and his hands shook as he stared at the phone. "Oh my God," Marquise whispered while he scrambled to find his car keys. Where were they? After which his heart raced as he grabbed his shoes and fumbled for his jacket. He rushed out the door, still tipsy, almost forgetting to lock it behind him, and ran to his car. The drive to the hospital was a blur of screeching tires and red lights. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tight that they hurt. At this point, he didn't care if she was mad or not. He just wanted her to be okay. He did his best to weave through the heavy traffic, road rage overtaking him. When he arrived at the hospital, Marquise sprinted through the entrance and gasped as he rushed to the reception desk. "Hey, excuse me! I'm looking for Katrina Terry. She's my wife. She came in earlier. There were complications with the pregnancy." The receptionist looked at him, her face impassive as she typed something into a computer. After a moment, she glanced up. "She's already been discharged." "What?" Marquise's stomach dropped, his pulse pounding in his ears. "But where did she go? How long ago did she leave?" "She was discharged about an hour ago," the receptionist said. "I'm sorry, but is there anything else I can help you with?" Marquise stared at the woman, who just stared back before turning away from the desk. "Where's my wife?" he wondered. His mind raced as he pulled out his phone and dialed Katrina's number while pacing the hospital floor. It rang and rang, each second feeling like an eternity, before going to voicemail. "Katrina, please. I'm so sorry. I'm at the hospital now. Please call me back. I'll come to you. I'll do whatever you need. Just let me know you're okay." He hung up and sent a flurry of unanswered texts, until deciding to do something he'd never done before, text her mother. "Katrina doesn't want to speak with you right now. Have a good night," was her only response. He wandered through the hospital lobby, feeling like the walls were closing in around him. While she was going through hell, I was sleeping, he thought. Marquise slumped into a chair in the waiting area, his phone clutched in his hand. After a half an hour passed, he stood up and walked out of the hospital. On his way home, his phone rang. His heart leapt when he glanced at the screen. "Katrina?" he answered, pulling over. "You finally decided to call back." "Baby, I've been trying to call you. Look, Katrina, I'm so sorry. I left as soon as I saw the messages. I was asleep." "What happened? Is Imani okay?" "Oh, now you care. Yes, she's okay. The doctor said a little bleeding is normal during pregnancy." "What do you mean, you asleep? You playin' right? I was in the hospital. I was bleeding. And you were sleeping?" "I didn't know. I didn't—" "Oh, let me guess. You were with your ex again, right?" For a moment, he was without words. "I'm so sorry, Katrina. I would have been there if I had known." "Look, I'm going to tell you this, Marquise. I'm done with your bullshit. We're done with your bullshit. And we're done until you quit taking that drug. Can you do that?" After a few seconds passed, she said, "If it takes you that long, then take your time to decide. But I am done until you're finished with that damn drug that you're obviously addicted to." And with that, the line went dead. He sat in his car on the side of the road and stared out into the darkness. She was right. He had to make the right choice. He couldn't keep doing this, and he was, in fact, addicted. A few hours after he got home that night, Marquise sat in a boat along with Nellie and Vince. They were in Venice of the North, in Amsterdam, having dinner while someone navigated the boat. It was evening in the dream world, the golden lights from candles illuminating the river. "I love you, Daddy," Vince said, wrapping his arms around Marquise's neck. "I love you too, son," he replied, kissing him on his forehead. "I'm glad you're back," Nellie said. "What's wrong?" she asked, before the three were teleported back to the mansion. "Nothing. I missed you too. More than I can say. It's just... All right. I've got to tell you something." Nellie leaned in, placing a hand on his chest. "You can tell me anything. You know that, Marky." He gestured to Vince to also come over and knelt down next to him, beginning to cry. "I love you both, but I have to go. I can't stay here. Not anymore." Vince's face crumpled, his eyes also filling with tears. "No, Daddy, please don't go. Please, stay with us." Marquise glanced at Nellie, whose smile had faded. "You're leaving us?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He nodded, though it felt like tearing himself apart. "I'm needed in the other world." "We need you, Daddy." Vince pulled his father closer. Nellie's hand reached for his, her grip gentle but firm. "Marquise, but not for long, right? Won't you be back?" He shook his head. "No, I can't. I wish I could, but I know what I'll lose if I don't go back." Vince clung to his father, his small fingers gripping tightly. "Please, Daddy," he whispered in his ear. "I need you." After a quiet evening at home, Katrina, Marquise, and their daughter, Imani, who is now 2, relaxed. After he had bid farewell to Nellie and Vince 2 years before, he was able to shake the drug, whose company was already beginning to be sued by multiple individuals. Marquise sat on the couch, cradling Imani in his lap as she giggled, her eyes growing heavier with each passing minute. The living room in their new home, thanks to another promotion, was warm and cozy, filled with the soft glow of the lamp on the end table. The TV was on, but it was more for background noise than anything else. It had been a long day, and the peaceful rhythm of family life was winding down for the night. Katrina smiled, sitting beside them, her feet curled up on the couch, watching as Marquise rocked their daughter. Imani's small hand clutched the collar of Marquise's shirt, her eyelids fluttering as she fought sleep. "She's out," Marquise whispered, glancing at Katrina with a soft smile. "I think it's time for bed." Katrina nodded, leaning over to kiss her daughter's forehead. "Good night, baby girl," she whispered. Marquise stood up carefully, holding Imani close to his chest as he made his way down the hallway to the nursery. The little girl's breathing was soft as he laid her in her crib, brushing a curl of hair from her forehead. He lingered for a moment, watching her sleep before stepping out of the room and closing the door, careful not to wake her. When he returned to the living room, Katrina was still on the couch, the faint flicker of the TV dancing across her face. "You coming to bed?" he asked, leaning down to kiss her on the forehead. "Not yet. I think I'll stay up for a bit. Watch something. You go ahead." He smiled and kissed her again, this time on the lips, lingering for a moment before pulling away. "All right, but don't stay up too late." "I won't," she laughed. Marquise glanced at her one last time, then turned to head down the hallway to their bedroom. "Good night," he called back, his voice trailing off as he disappeared into the darkness. "Good night," she called back as she listened to his footsteps fade. She waited a few moments, her eyes following the TV as she heard him close the bedroom door. Katrina got up and went to the refrigerators before reaching behind it. When she pulls her arm back out, she has something in her hand. It is Mr. Core. She pulled it out, turning it over in her hands for a moment before unscrewing the cap. With a deep breath, Katrina popped the pill into her mouth and swallowed it down, her hand shaking slightly as she put the bottle back before going back to the living room. She leaned back into the couch, pulling the blanket over herself, and closed her eyes. When Katrina opened them again, she was no longer in the home her and Marquise shared. She was in a hammock on a tropical island, the sky a brilliant shade of blue, the waves gently lapping at the shore. The air was warm, the breeze soft against her skin, and she is not alone. Beside her, also lying down, is none other than Savian, the psychiatrist she referred her husband to. "Remember when we used to date my 2nd year?" she laughed. "Crazy times," he responded, pulling her body closer. She looked around, taking in the vibrant colors of the island, the lush greenery, the sound of the ocean. It was peaceful here. Perfect. How are things with you and Marquise? A lot better since Imani's been born. So glad he's off this shit. Mr. Core isn't for everyone. You seem to be enjoying it, he smiled, kissing her on the cheek. And the two laughed.